Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Please drop a like or comment if you want to help the channel. Now let's get into the true scary stories. Whispers of the Hollow. I never believed in the legends about the Hollow, the vast forest behind Harlan Ridge, just on the outskirts of town. Stories of ghostly apparitions, shadows that moved on their own, and whispers on the wind were passed down from generation to generation. Growing up, it was all nonsense, and as a rational person, I dismissed them. Yet here I was, years later, standing in front of the very house I'd heard so much about, my fingers trembling as I reached for the door. The house belonged to my late grandmother, a reclusive woman who had always insisted something lingered in those woods. "Don't go near the hollow," she'd warn. "There are things you can't unsee." When she passed, I inherited the property and figured a weekend visit would be harmless. I couldn't have been more wrong. The air felt heavy as I crossed the threshold, the musty scent of wood and dust clinging to me. The walls seemed to close in, every creak of the floorboards sounding too deliberate, as though the house was aware of my presence. I settled in, trying to shake the discomfort, but the unease lingered. My first night alone in the house was uneventful, except for a chilling draft that crawled along my spine. It felt like icy fingers brushing against my skin. I told myself it was just the old windows leaking air, though the sensation was too distinct to ignore. The second night, the draft returned, but this time I could feel something else, a faint pressure, almost like fingertips trailing across the back of my neck. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, convinced I was imagining things. That's when I heard it, a soft, nearly imperceptible whisper. At first, it was like the wind stirring through the trees, but soon it grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't random, either. The words were garbled, but there was a pattern, a rhythm. I strained to listen, but it seemed to slither away just as quickly as it came. My skin prickled. The fireplace, unlit, suddenly exuded a coldness that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "It's just an old house," I muttered, trying to reassure myself, but deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. By the third night, the whispers had grown more frequent, louder, and more sinister. It wasn't just a sound on the wind, it was inside the house, echoing down the long hallway from the guest room. I wasn't imagining it. Something was trying to speak to me. The more I tried to block it out, the more persistent it became. And then, I felt it again, those fingers. But this time, they didn't trace my back, they gripped my arm. Cold, skeletal, and very much real. I bolted upright, gasping, but nothing was there. My heart raced as I stumbled out of bed, grabbing the flashlight I'd placed on the nightstand. I felt ridiculous, yet the fear gnawed at me, primal and undeniable. The hallway loomed before me, dark and silent, yet it felt alive with something waiting just beyond the shadows. I stepped toward the guest room, where the whispers had seemed to originate, each step heavier than the last. The door creaked open. The room was untouched, just as it had been since I arrived. But the air was colder here, sharper, and I could almost hear a distant humming now. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the darkness. And then, I felt them again, those icy fingers, no longer subtle, but digging into my shoulders. I spun around, but the room was empty. The weight on my shoulders vanished as quickly as it came, leaving me gasping for air. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall, my hand shaking uncontrollably. When the overhead light flickered on, the room was bathed in a sickly yellow glow, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural directions. My eyes darted around the space, nothing was out of place. The bed remained neatly made, the dresser untouched, the curtains fluttering gently in the night breeze. Yet something was deeply wrong. I backed away from the center of the room, my heart still racing. There was a presence here, something unseen but undeniable, and it was no longer content with whispers. I glanced at the old clock on the wall. The time was 3:15 a.m., the witching hour, they called it. My grandmother used to mutter about this hour being a portal between the living and the dead. I had never believed in such nonsense, but now I wasn't so sure. I hurried back to the master bedroom, my pulse still pounding in my ears. I closed the door behind me, locking it, though I knew deep down that no lock could keep whatever this was out. Sleep was out of the question, but I forced myself to sit on the bed and think. I had to make sense of it, rationalize it. Maybe the stress of inheriting the house, The loneliness of being here was playing tricks on my mind. But as I sat there, clutching the blankets to my chest, the whispers returned. Only this time, they weren't distant. They were right behind me. My breath hitched as I slowly turned my head toward the door. Nothing. But the whispers, they were growing clearer, words taking shape, repeating in a monotonous chant. Come, see, come, see. The sound was coming from the closet. My skin went cold. Every instinct told me to run, but something stronger, something I couldn't explain, drew me toward it. I stood, legs shaky, and approached the closet door. My hand hovered over the handle, hesitating. I yanked the door open, and for a brief moment, there was nothing but the faint smell of old wood and mothballs. Then, I saw it, etched into the back wall of the closet, faint but unmistakable, was a symbol. I had seen it before, in one of my grandmother's old journals. A circle, with jagged lines radiating from the center like claws. I stumbled back, my heart slamming in my chest. That symbol had something to do with the hollow. I remembered my grandmother's frantic handwriting warning about it, never summon what you can't send back. A gust of icy air shot out from the closet, slamming the door shut in my face. The whispers surged, louder, angrier, filling the room until I could hardly think. And then, in an instant, they stopped. The room fell into an unnerving silence. I stood there, paralyzed, until a faint knock echoed from the floor beneath me. 1, 2, 3 knocks. The floorboards vibrated under my feet, and the sensation grew stronger, as if something, or someone, was crawling beneath the floor, trying to get in. My pulse raced as I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear against the wood. There, just below the surface, I heard it, scratching. The sound of nails, long and sharp, raking across the floorboards. I scrambled back, my hands shaking. There was something trapped under the house, something desperate to get out. But how? How was that possible? I had walked through the entire property, seen nothing unusual. Yet now, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been lurking in the shadows, whispering, was waking up, and it was no longer satisfied with just watching. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the bed, the flashlight clutched in my hand, waiting for the dawn to chase away the creeping horror that had taken root in the house. Sleep never came, but the whispers faded with the first rays of sunlight. I convinced myself that daylight meant safety, though deep down I knew whatever haunted this place didn't obey such simple rules. Determined to find answers, I ventured into the old study. It had been my grandmother's favorite room, filled with dusty tomes and cryptic notebooks. I started rummaging through her journals, flipping frantically through pages, trying to piece together whatever she had known about the hollow. The more I read, the more I realized just how deep her obsession had gone. She had written about the hollow as if it were alive, a breathing, malevolent entity. It watches, it waits, she had scrawled in the margins of one book. It cannot be appeased, only trapped. One entry stood out. In shaky handwriting, my grandmother had written about a ritual, something she had done to keep the things from crossing over completely. The symbol I'd seen in the closet was part of it. It was a binding sigil, meant to seal whatever lay beneath the house. She hadn't summoned the thing, she had trapped it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The whispers, the fingers, the knocking beneath the floorboards, it wasn't a haunting. It was something much worse. I needed to leave. The thought pounded in my head, but as I stuffed the journal into my bag, the scratching sound returned. This time, it wasn't below the floor. It was in the walls. My breath quickened as I backed away from the desk, the room suddenly feeling smaller, more oppressive. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if something were clawing its way toward me from every direction. No, I whispered to myself, shaking my head. This couldn't be happening. Not in the daylight. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the ceiling, followed by another, then another. My heart leapt into my throat as I watched in horror. The walls, once silent and still, began to pulse, almost like they were alive. The wallpaper bulged outward, as though something was pressing against it from the other side. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. Was this what my grandmother had warned about? The thing in the hollow trying to break free? A voice, my grandmother's voice, echoed in my mind, never summon what you can't send back. But I hadn't summoned anything. Or had I? Maybe just being here, reopening the house, had disturbed it. The sigil, it had been drawn to keep something inside. And now, I had found it, seen it, and somehow weakened the seal. Panic gripped me. I had to reseal it, but I had no idea how. My eyes darted around the room, landing on a large mirror hanging on the far wall. For a second, I thought I saw movement, something shifting behind my reflection. I took a step closer, staring at the glass. The room reflected back at me, dim and foreboding, but as I leaned in, I saw it, eyes. Pale, hollow eyes staring out from behind the glass. A scream caught in my throat as I stumbled back, but the thing inside the mirror didn't move. It just watched me, as if it had been there the entire time, waiting. The walls groaned again, the bulging growing more pronounced. Something was pushing through, something dark and malevolent. I had to get out, but when I ran to the door, the handle wouldn't budge. The house was holding me in, and the scratching, it was closer, louder, just inches from the surface. I could hear the raspy breaths now, feel the oppressive weight of its presence pressing against my chest. I slammed my fists against the door, screaming, but the sound was swallowed by the building, as if the house itself were alive, feeding on my fear. And then, behind me, I heard a voice, my grandmother's voice, whispering in my ear. "You've let it out." The room seemed to tilt as her voice echoed in my ear. "You've let it out." I whipped around, half expecting to see her standing there, but there was only the shadowed corner of the study, the walls still groaning as something inside clawed at them. My legs felt like lead as I backed away from the door, realizing that escape wasn't an option anymore. Whatever I had disturbed, whatever had been waiting for so long, was now awake, and it was coming. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping, twisting together in a language I couldn't understand but somehow felt deep in my bones. My grandmother's journal slipped from my grasp, its pages fluttering open on the floor, revealing more of her frantic writings. I crouched down, flipping through the brittle pages until I found it, her final entry, scribbled hastily, as if she had been in a panic. "If the seal breaks, it will come for the bloodline. It knows. It remembers." I froze. The bloodline. It wasn't after the house, it was after me. Suddenly, the air around me thickened, and I felt the temperature plummet. My breath came out in visible puffs, and that familiar sensation returned, those cold fingers tracing my spine, only this time they didn't stop. They gripped my shoulders, tight and unyielding, pulling me backward. I screamed, thrashing, but there was nothing to fight, nothing to grab onto. My feet dragged across the floor as I was pulled into the center of the room. The walls seemed to pulse, their surfaces rippling as if alive. The mirror across from me shattered, shards spraying the room as a low, guttural growl emanated from somewhere deep below. I hit the floor hard, my head spinning, but I forced myself to stand, my eyes darting to the closet where the sigil had been etched. The symbol was still there, but now, instead of containing whatever was beneath the house, it seemed to be reacting, glowing faintly, its jagged lines flickering like a dying flame. I had to do something, but I didn't know how. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind again, "Never summon what you can't send back." The growling grew louder, and the floor beneath me began to shake. Cracks spiderwebbed across the wooden boards, and through them, I could see darkness, endless, consuming darkness. Something was rising from below, something ancient and furious. I could feel its rage, its hunger. The shadows in the room twisted, and from the corners, long, spindly limbs began to emerge, like the legs of a massive spider creeping closer. I rushed toward the closet, my fingers fumbling as I tried to redraw the symbol with anything I could find. My trembling hands smeared the dust, but the lines wouldn't hold. The air was thick with the stench of rot and decay, and I felt the floor splinter beneath me. "No, no, no." I screamed, my voice cracking as I tried to focus. But it was too late. A deafening crack split the room, and the floor gave way beneath my feet. I tumbled into the darkness below, the cold, damp air rushing up to meet me. For a moment, there was nothing, just the sensation of falling, deeper and deeper into the void. Then, I hit the ground, hard, the impact knocking the wind from my lungs. Gasping, I struggled to sit up, only to find myself in a cavernous space, the air thick with the stench of damp earth and something far worse. Shadows swirled around me, moving with a will of their own, and from the darkness, the shape of something massive began to emerge. Its eyes, those hollow, pale eyes, locked onto me, and I knew. This was what my grandmother had trapped, the thing she had spent her life trying to contain. The whispers turned to growls, the creature's form growing larger, limbs stretching out to fill the cavern. I scrambled backward, desperate to find a way out, but the walls around me closed in, the earth shifting as if alive. And then, the creature spoke, not in words, but in my mind, its voice low and dripping with malice. "You cannot escape. You are mine." Terror surged through me as I realized the truth. The seal had been broken, and there was no stopping it now. Whatever this thing was, it had been waiting for me. For my bloodline. And now that it was free, it would consume me, just as it had done with those before. The last thing I felt was the cold, skeletal grip of its fingers wrapping around my throat, dragging me down into the darkness, where the whispers would never stop. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Attic's Typewriter. When I first found the old typewriter in the attic, it seemed like nothing more than a relic of the past, tucked away between dusty boxes and forgotten memories. Its keys were rusted and the metal frame was speckled with age, but something about it caught my attention. I couldn't resist placing it on the wooden desk by the small, grimy attic window. As the moonlight poured in that night, it illuminated the machine with an eerie glow, casting long shadows on the attic walls. My fingers twitched with curiosity, and before I knew it, I was sitting in front of it, a strange compulsion pulling me toward the keys. The first time I typed on it, the words came naturally. Too naturally. It wasn't me writing, at least not consciously. The words on the page described a dream, one I hadn't remembered until I saw it on the paper. It was of a man, his face obscured by darkness, standing at the foot of my bed. He didn't speak, didn't move, but I could feel his breath. I could hear the quiet rasp of something ancient, something wrong. When I woke up that morning, I brushed it off as the remnants of a bad night's sleep. But the next night, the typewriter had another dream to tell. And then another. Each morning after I wrote, I would find the same dreams replaying in my head. Except now, they were clearer, sharper, like they had been pulled from the depths of my mind and placed right in front of me. I couldn't ignore them anymore. Nightmares of faceless figures crawling out from under my bed, whispers leaking through the cracks in the walls, shadows lurking just beyond my vision. The typewriter was pulling these from me, and I was helpless to stop it. But last night, something changed. It wasn't a dream that I had lived before. This one was new, and terrifyingly vivid. The typewriter clattered beneath my fingertips, seemingly of its own will, describing an attic far darker than mine. The windows were nailed shut, the walls thick with cobwebs, and at the center of the room, the same typewriter sat. But this time, I wasn't the one typing. In the corner of my vision, I could see something, a figure, hunched over, its long fingers draped over the machine. Its face, twisted with hunger, stared at me from behind a veil of shadows. The last line the typewriter printed chilled me to my bones. "It's coming for you tonight." The words stared back at me from the paper, mocking my disbelief. My fingers had stopped typing, but I hadn't pressed anything to end it. The machine was silent, the keys still, but the dread within me grew. I ripped the paper from the typewriter and fled the attic, but the moment I stepped downstairs, the air felt thick, like something was waiting. I locked every door, shut every window, but nothing could shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. And now, as the sun begins to set again, I know the worst is yet to come. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the house in an unsettling twilight. Shadows stretched long and crooked across the walls, crawling like dark fingers ready to seize me. I stood in the hallway, clutching the paper the typewriter had forced me to write. The words blurred in my vision, but that last line remained seared into my mind. "It's coming for you tonight." I didn't know what it was, but my gut told me that when night came, I'd find out. The house was too quiet. Every creak in the floorboards echoed like a warning, and the wind outside seemed to howl louder than usual. I tried to shake the dread, convincing myself it was just an overactive imagination, a trick of the mind. But the weight in the air, thick and suffocating, told a different story. Something had changed since I wrote on that damn typewriter. Something had been set into motion. I decided to go back upstairs, thinking maybe I could destroy the thing and end whatever nightmare I had unleashed. But when I reached the attic door, my heart sank. The knob was ice cold, as if the temperature had dropped dramatically on the other side. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. The attic was as I had left it, except for one thing: the typewriter wasn't where I had left it. It was no longer on the desk. "Hello?" My voice trembled, bouncing back at me in the hollow room. I scanned the dim space, my eyes adjusting to the shadows. And then I saw it. In the farthest corner, the typewriter sat, its keys faintly clinking by themselves. No one touched it. Yet, it moved as if invisible hands were typing out another nightmare. The sound was subtle at first, like fingers brushing the metal keys, but then it grew louder, click-clack, like a furious whisper trying to be heard. I inched closer, my breath shallow. The keys stopped moving the moment I was near enough to read what had been typed. My hands shook as I tore the paper from the machine. The words written were short, but the meaning was clear: "Don't run. It's too late." Before I could comprehend what was happening, I heard a sound from downstairs, a low, guttural scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My stomach knotted in fear. I froze, straining my ears. The noise grew louder, closer, until it sounded like it was just below me. Something, or someone, was in the house. I bolted for the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But as I reached the bottom of the attic steps, the sound stopped. Silence fell over the house again, and for a brief moment, I dared to hope that maybe it was my imagination playing tricks on me. Maybe there was nothing after all. But then, I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, its body unnaturally thin, draped in a tattered cloak that clung to its skeletal frame. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as though its neck had been snapped. It didn't move, didn't speak. But I could feel it watching me, its eyes boring into my soul, waiting for me to take one step closer. My legs trembled as I backed away, the walls closing in. Then, without warning, it took one slow, deliberate step toward me. I backed away slowly, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The figure, with its crooked neck and gaunt frame, moved in unsettlingly slow strides. The air around it seemed to thicken, like the house itself was holding its breath, watching. My mind raced as I desperately tried to remember if I had locked the front door, if there was any way out, or if I was trapped with whatever horror had crossed the threshold into my home. It took another step toward me. The dragging sound was back, scraping like nails across old wood. I swallowed hard, unable to tear my gaze from its grotesque, contorted form. In the dim light, I could make out more details. Its skin was stretched tight over bones, patches of hair hanging limply from a cracked skull. But worst of all were its eyes, hollow and black, like voids that swallowed the light. "Who are you?" I forced the words out, though my voice was barely a whisper. I don't know why I expected an answer. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. It didn't need to speak, its presence alone was enough to communicate the threat. The figure stopped, its head slowly jerking upward. The sound of bones creaking filled the hallway, and I winced, watching as it twisted its neck even further, the head now upside down, its mouth hanging open in a grotesque mockery of a smile. A deep, raspy voice finally broke the silence, though the mouth didn't move. "You wrote me," it said, the words crawling into my ears like a sickness. "You gave me life." I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real. It can't be real." But the truth was impossible to ignore. The nightmares the typewriter had pulled from my mind, the warnings it had written, they weren't just fantasies. They were becoming reality, twisted and brought to life by some dark force. The creature began to move again, faster this time, its limbs jerking as though controlled by invisible strings. I bolted, sprinting down the hallway, my feet barely touching the ground. I reached the front door and yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My fingers fumbled, trying to unlock it, but the door remained stubbornly closed, like the house itself had sealed me in. Behind me, the creature's footsteps quickened. I turned to see it mere feet away, its neck cracking and twisting with every step. Desperation surged through me. I wasn't going to let this thing catch me. I darted down the hallway, heading for the only other place I could think of, the attic. The stairs creaked under my weight as I flew up them, my legs burning from the effort. I slammed the attic door behind me and braced myself against it, heart pounding in my chest. I could hear it now, slow, deliberate footsteps coming up the stairs. The attic was darker than before, but in the dim glow from the small window, I saw it, the typewriter. It sat there, silent, waiting. An idea, a dangerous one, flickered in my mind. The typewriter had written these horrors into existence, hadn't it? Maybe it could stop them too. Without a second thought, I raced to the desk and sat in front of the machine. My fingers trembled as they hovered over the keys. "Stop," I typed. "Make it stop." The keys clattered loudly in the silent attic, but nothing happened. The footsteps outside the attic door paused for a moment, as though the creature was listening, deciding. Then, with a deafening crash, the attic door burst open. The attic door exploded inward, wood splintering as the creature crashed through, its twisted body jerking unnaturally. I scrambled backward from the desk, my heart hammering against my ribs as the figure entered the room, its hollow eyes locked onto me. The broken neck swayed grotesquely, head still upside down, and from its throat came a low, guttural sound, a laugh, distorted and sick. "You can't stop me," the voice whispered, though its mouth never moved. "I'm already here." I glanced at the typewriter, the keys still warm beneath my fingers. It had to work. If it could bring this nightmare to life, it had to be able to undo it. I slammed my hands onto the keys again, feverishly typing. The creature vanished. Its body dissolved into nothing. But the moment I stopped typing, the creature moved closer, faster, as if my words meant nothing. "Your words are mine now," it hissed, its bony hand outstretched, fingers like claws, reaching for me. I backed against the far wall, panic clawing at my chest. I could feel its cold breath, see the ragged patches of skin that barely held its skeletal frame together. The shadows around it seemed to pulse, alive with some dark energy, ready to swallow me whole. And then I realized something. My nightmares, it wasn't the typewriter that had brought them to life. It was me. My fear, my desperation, they had shaped the horrors on the page, given them power. Every word I typed, every dark thought that crossed my mind, was feeding the creature, making it stronger. The typewriter was only a conduit, a vessel for something far older and more dangerous than I had imagined. The creature's voice filled the room again, scraping like nails on glass. "It's time," it said, the words vibrating in my skull. "You've written your last nightmare." I was cornered, nowhere left to run. But then, a flash of inspiration struck, a final, desperate thought. If my fear had brought it here, maybe I could still use the typewriter to save myself. I lunged for the desk, barely avoiding the creature's grasp, and furiously began typing the only thing I could think of. I wasn't afraid. The typewriter fought me. The keys jammed, sticking as though the machine itself was resisting. The creature let out a guttural screech, its long fingers inches from my throat, but I kept typing, pouring every ounce of willpower into those words. I wasn't afraid. It had no power over me. The room seemed to darken, the walls vibrating with a deep, resonant hum. The creature faltered, its movements slowing, becoming jerky, uncertain. Its hollow eyes fixed on me, confusion flashing across its grotesque face. I could feel the energy in the room shifting, the hold it had on me weakening. "I'm not afraid," I shouted, hammering the final words into the typewriter. It was nothing. Only a nightmare. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature stood still, staring at me, and a cold wave of terror washed over me, stronger than before. Maybe I had failed. Maybe it was too late. But then, just as the creature lunged for me, its body shuddered violently. Its skin began to crack, like old, dried paper peeling away. Black tendrils of smoke rose from the wounds, curling into the air. "No!" It screeched, the sound inhuman, echoing through the attic. Its body convulsed, twisting and unraveling as if being torn apart from the inside. With one final, piercing wail, the creature disintegrated, dissolving into ash that scattered across the floor. The attic fell silent. The weight that had pressed on me for days was lifted, the suffocating presence gone. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, staring at the typewriter. It sat on the desk, as still and lifeless as it had been when I first found it, no longer humming with that eerie energy. But before I could feel relief, something on the paper caught my eye. One last line had appeared, though I hadn't typed it. The ink seemed to bleed through the page as if written by an invisible hand. It read, "There's always another nightmare." The typewriter gave one last click, and the attic door creaked open. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.